Leaving home changed everything. Have you ever stared at your phone at 2 a.m.? Scrolling through photos of people who love you, and wondered why chasing independence feels so lonely? I didn't leave my family because I was brave. I left because I thought distance would magically turn me into a stronger version of myself. America looked like a clean reset, new climate, new culture, new rules. What I didn't expect was that living far from family would first break me quietly before it built me back up, piece by piece. When I landed in the United States, everything felt louder and colder at the same time. Not just the weather, though the sharp winter air hit my lungs like a reminder that I was no longer home, but the pace of life. People moved fast, spoke directly, planned weeks ahead. Back home, family meant noise, warmth, interruption. In America, independence was the default setting. If you didn't schedule it, it didn't happen. That shift sounds small, but psychologically, it's massive. Studies in cross-cultural psychology show that moving from a collectivist family culture to an individualist one increases stress hormones in the first year, especially when social support is suddenly reduced. I didn't know the science then. I just knew my chest felt tight for no obvious reason. You think leaving home is one big dramatic moment. It's not. It's 1,000 quiet realizations. Like the first time something good happens and you instinctively reach for your phone, then stop, because time zones mean everyone is asleep. Or the first time something goes wrong and you realize there's no one nearby who shares your memories, your language shortcuts, your inside jokes. Your brain hates this. Neuroscience tells us that familiarity reduces cognitive load. Family is mental shorthand. Without it, everything costs more energy. No wonder you feel tired all the time. I told myself I was fine. That's what independence culture teaches you. Be strong. Handle it. Don't complain. But loneliness doesn't show up as sadness at first. It shows up as irritation, self-doubt, and a weird sense that you're always behind. In the U.S., success is measured loudly: careers, productivity, growth. When you're new and far from family, you start comparing your behind-the-scenes struggle with everyone else's highlight reel. Psychologists call this upward social comparison, and it's brutal on motivation. I felt it every time someone casually asked, "So what do you do?" As if your worth could be summarized in one sentence. Climate played its own sneaky role. Seasonal affective research shows that long winters and reduced sunlight can lower serotonin levels, especially for people not used to it. I came from a place where weather didn't trap you indoors for months. Suddenly, silence filled the apartment. Silence amplifies thoughts. And some thoughts are not kind. I started questioning why I left it all. Was distance really building independence, or was it just erasing parts of me? Here's the uncomfortable truth no one puts in motivational videos. Independence often begins as abandonment, self-inflicted. But abandonment nonetheless. You choose growth, but your nervous system reads separation as loss. Attachment theory explains this clearly. Humans are wired to regulate emotions through close relationships. Remove them abruptly, and the system panics. That panic isn't weakness. It's biology. Understanding this changed everything for me later, but in the beginning, I just felt broken. Daily life in America reinforced the lesson. Policies, systems, even customer service assumed you'd advocate for yourself. Forms didn't explain themselves. Healthcare didn't hold your hand. Workplaces respected boundaries but expected initiative. At first, this felt harsh. Over time, it revealed something important. Independence isn't confidence. It's practice. The more times I failed alone, missed deadlines, misunderstood social cues, sat with uncomfortable feelings, the more my brain learned that survival didn't require an audience. I remember one ordinary evening that shifted something. I was cooking a simple meal, nothing special, when it hit me that no one was coming home. No shared dinner. No familiar voices. Just me. And instead of panicking, I felt a strange calm. Not happiness. Acceptance. Psychologists describe this as emotional adaptation, the moment your nervous system stops fighting reality and starts working with it. That's when growth actually begins. Distance didn't make me stronger overnight. It stripped me first. It removed automatic support, cultural comfort, and the illusion that someone would always catch me. What it gave me, slowly, was self-trust. Each problem solved alone built a quiet competence. Research on self-efficacy shows that mastery experiences, handling challenges yourself, are the strongest source of confidence. Not praise. Not motivation quotes. Experience. If you're living far from family right now and questioning everything, hear this. The discomfort you feel is not a sign you made the wrong choice. It's a sign your identity is reorganizing. America doesn't soften that process. It accelerates it. The climate, the culture, the policies, they don't adapt to you. You adapt to them. And adaptation, while painful, is the foundation of independence. Leaving home changed everything because it forced me to meet myself without a safety net. No translations. No buffers. Just who I was and who I needed to become. Distance didn't erase my love for my family. It revealed how deeply I carried them within me, and how capable I was of standing on my own. In the end, independence isn't about being alone. It's about knowing you can survive loneliness without losing yourself. Climate shock and loneliness. The first winter in America didn't announce itself politely. It arrived like a closed door. The sky turned gray early, the air grew sharp, and daylight felt like a limited-time offer. Where I came from, weather was something you noticed but didn't negotiate with. In many parts of the U.S., climate dictates your rhythm, your mood, even your social life. And when you're far from family, that climate shock doesn't just freeze your hands, it isolates your mind. Cold changes behavior. That's not poetry, that's science. Research in environmental psychology shows that colder temperatures and reduced sunlight directly affect serotonin and dopamine regulation, increasing vulnerability to loneliness and low motivation. You don't suddenly feel sad. You feel slower, less interested, more withdrawn. I noticed it in small habits, fewer walks, fewer conversations, more evenings staring at screens just to feel some movement. Loneliness doesn't knock. It seeps in through routine. America is efficient in winter. People drive instead of walk. They plan instead of wander. Social interactions become scheduled events rather than spontaneous gatherings. For someone raised in a warmer, more communal environment, this feels personal at first. You start telling yourself stories. People are cold, unfriendly, distant. The truth is simpler and harder. The environment shapes behavior, and you're new to the rules. Anthropologists call this environmental determinism, the idea that climate influences cultural norms. Understanding that doesn't immediately make you feel better, but it stops you from blaming yourself. Loneliness in a new climate is quieter than homesickness. Homesickness hurts loudly. Loneliness just makes days blur together. I would wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Weeks passed without anything remarkable happening, and that scared me more than struggle. When nothing pushes back, your thoughts do. Cognitive science explains that the brain fills sensory gaps with internal narratives. Fewer external stimuli mean more internal noise. That's when doubt gets creative. There's a cruel irony here. The U.S. promotes independence as strength, but winter independence can feel like emotional exile. No family dinners. No drop-in visits. Even phone calls feel shorter because everyone's busy surviving their own schedules. Time zones stretch emotional distance. When you're tired and cold, connection requires effort, and effort is the first thing to disappear when mental energy is low. I remember one afternoon standing at a bus stop, wind cutting through my jacket, watching people stare straight ahead. No small talk. No eye contact. My mind immediately jumped to rejection. But social neuroscience offers a different explanation. In unfamiliar or uncomfortable environments, humans reduce social risk by minimizing interaction. It's not unkindness. It's self-protection. Realizing this reframed everything. The loneliness wasn't because I didn't belong. It was because everyone was conserving energy, including me. Climate also changes how you process time. Long winters stretch perception. Psychologists call this temporal dilation, when monotonous conditions make time feel slower. Days felt endless, but months disappeared. That distortion messes with motivation. You feel like you're stuck, even while progress is happening quietly. I questioned my choices more during winter than any other season. Not because things were worse, but because my brain was deprived of novelty and light. Here's where healing started, unintentionally. I stopped fighting the climate and started adapting to it. Small actions mattered. Morning light exposure, even artificial, helped regulate my sleep. Short walks, even in cold, reminded my body it still existed. Research consistently shows that behavioral activation, doing small physical actions despite low mood, can reduce depressive symptoms more effectively than waiting for motivation. Motivation follows movement, not the other way around. Loneliness eased slightly when I stopped interpreting silence as failure. America's quiet seasons taught me something family never could, how to sit with myself without distraction. That sounds empowering now, but at the time, it felt uncomfortable. Silence forces self-awareness. You notice patterns, avoidances, old emotional habits that noise once covered. Climate stripped away excuses. There was nowhere to hide from my own thoughts, so I had to learn how to listen without spiraling. Distance from family amplified all of this. Without familiar voices to normalize my feelings, I had to validate myself. That's a developmental leap psychologists associate with adulthood, internal validation replacing external reassurance. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels lonely before it feels strong. But this shift is crucial for independence. When you can name your emotions without immediately seeking comfort, you regain control over them. Over time, the cold stopped feeling hostile. It became neutral. Winter didn't mean isolation, it meant introspection. Climate shock taught me that healing isn't always warm and gentle. Sometimes it's quiet, uncomfortable, and slow. And sometimes, that's exactly what you need to grow. Living far from family during harsh seasons didn't harden my heart. It sharpened my awareness. It taught me that loneliness isn't proof of failure, it's a signal that adaptation is happening. Climate didn't create my isolation. It revealed my resilience. And once I understood that, the cold lost its power. It was just weather again, not a verdict on my life. Cultural gaps hurt quietly. Culture shock doesn't explode. It whispers. It hides inside ordinary moments until you start doubting your instincts. In America, the differences didn't feel dramatic at first. No one yelled. No one rejected me outright. Instead, there were pauses that felt slightly too long, smiles that didn't mean what I thought they meant. Conversations that ended politely but went nowhere. Cultural gaps don't bruise the skin. They bruise interpretation. In many American spaces, clarity is valued more than harmony. People say what they mean, but they don't always say what they feel. Coming from a culture where emotions are read between lines, I kept searching for hidden meanings that weren't there. Social psychologists call this high context versus low context communication. The U.S. leans low context, messages are explicit, not implied. When you're wired for the opposite, your brain works overtime. You analyze tone, timing, facial expressions, trying to decode something that was never encoded. That mental labor is exhausting. And exhaustion often disguises itself as self-doubt. The quiet pain showed up in conversations. Someone would say, "That's interesting," and move on. Back home, that meant curiosity. Here, it sometimes meant closure. Not rude, just efficient. Efficiency is admired in American culture, but emotional efficiency can feel cold if you're not used to it. Over time, I noticed myself shrinking in dialogue, offering less, sharing less, protecting energy. Cultural gaps don't silence you immediately. They teach you to speak smaller. Work environments intensified this. In the U.S., confidence is performed verbally. You advocate for yourself, list achievements, ask directly for what you want. Modesty, in many other cultures, is respect. Here, it can read as uncertainty. Organizational psychology research shows that immigrants often experience confidence penalties because communication styles don't match dominant norms. I wasn't less capable. I was less legible. And being misunderstood repeatedly erodes motivation faster than failure. The hardest part was not knowing when I was doing something wrong. No feedback doesn't mean approval. It often just means neutrality. That ambiguity kept my nervous system on edge. Neuroscience tells us that uncertainty activates threat responses more than negative certainty. Your brain would rather hear no than nothing at all. Cultural gaps create prolonged uncertainty, and prolonged uncertainty drains emotional resilience. Relationships outside work felt similarly delicate. American friendliness is real, but it's bounded. Smiles don't always invite intimacy. Invitations are sincere but scheduled. I misread warmth as closeness and felt confused when it didn't deepen. Sociologists describe this as friendly distance, a norm that balances politeness with personal boundaries. It protects autonomy but can confuse newcomers who associate warmth with inclusion. The result is a quiet grief, feeling surrounded by people yet emotionally alone. Distance from family amplified everything. Normally, family reflects you back to yourself. They confirm that your reactions make sense. Without that mirror, cultural misunderstandings felt like personal flaws. I asked myself whether I was too sensitive, too slow, too much. This internalization is common. Acculturation studies show that immigrants often blame themselves before questioning the system. Self-blame feels productive. It's also corrosive. Healing began when I stopped moralizing differences. Cultural gaps aren't failures of character, they're mismatches of expectation. Once I framed them as neutral, not personal, the sting softened. I started observing instead of absorbing. Why do people here value speed? Why is privacy so protected? Curiosity replaced judgment, and curiosity is psychologically protective. Research links curiosity to lower anxiety and higher adaptability because it shifts the brain from threat mode to learning mode. I practiced micro-adjustments instead of full assimilation. Shorter explanations. Clearer asks. Less emotional forecasting. These weren't betrayals of self, they were translations. Linguists note that bilingual people don't lose identity, they gain range. Cultural fluency works the same way. You don't erase your values. You learn when and how to express them so they're received. Loneliness eased when I found people who also lived between cultures. Shared misinterpretation became connection. We laughed about awkward moments, misread signals, accidental bluntness. Humor, according to social psychology, is a bonding shortcut, it signals safety. Those conversations didn't erase the gaps, but they normalized them. Normalization is powerful. It tells your nervous system that you're not defective, you're adapting. The quiet hurt of cultural difference taught me something family never had to teach explicitly. Identity isn't fixed. It's negotiated. Every day, you decide which parts to protect and which to evolve. America didn't ask me to become someone else. It asked me to become more conscious of who I was being. Cultural gaps still exist. They probably always will. But they no longer feel like invisible wounds. They're reference points. Signals that I'm navigating complexity, not failing at belonging. Living far from family forced me to build internal permission, to trust my values even when they weren't mirrored back. Distance built independence not by isolating me, but by teaching me discernment. Not every silence is rejection. Not every difference is a threat. Understanding heals quietly too. And once you understand that cultural gaps hurt without intention, you stop hurting yourself in response. Politics in daily life. Politics in America doesn't wait for election season. It lives in grocery store conversations, workplace policies, healthcare forms, school calendars, and even the tone of a casual joke. When I first arrived, I thought politics was something you followed on the news, something loud and distant. I was wrong. In the U.S., politics is woven into daily life so tightly that you feel it before you understand it, especially when you're far from family and familiar systems. The shock wasn't about choosing sides. It was about realizing that neutrality itself is often interpreted as a position. In many cultures, political discussion is either avoided or handled carefully within trusted circles. In America, political identity can be as visible as a sports team. Bumper stickers, office conversations, social media bios, they all signal values. Social psychologists describe this as identity signaling, using beliefs to communicate who you are and where you belong. For newcomers, decoding these signals is mentally taxing. At work, policies weren't just rules. They reflected larger political climates, remote work regulations, healthcare benefits, diversity training, speech guidelines. None of it felt personal, yet all of it affected daily survival. Immigration paperwork, tax forms, insurance language, systems assumed fluency not just in English, but in institutional logic. Research on cognitive load shows that navigating unfamiliar bureaucracies significantly increases stress, especially without social support. Back home, family would explain things. Here, Google replaced guidance, and uncertainty filled the gaps. Conversations felt risky at first. Not because people were aggressive, but because reactions were unpredictable. One comment could be met with enthusiastic agreement or sudden silence. Silence is powerful. Neuroscience shows that social exclusion activates the same brain regions as physical pain. When a conversation stalls, your nervous system notices, even if no one says a word. Over time, I learned to measure sentences before speaking, editing myself in real time. That constant self-monitoring drains emotional energy. Distance from family made this heavier. Family usually provides ideological safety. You can speak imperfectly, change your mind, contradict yourself without fear of exile. Without that buffer, political tension felt personal. I missed spaces where disagreement didn't threaten belonging. Sociologists call this affective polarization, when political differences feel like moral judgments. Living inside that environment while still learning the cultural rules felt like walking on invisible cracks. Yet something unexpected happened. Exposure softened my thinking. Hearing diverse perspectives daily forced nuance. American political culture is loud, but it's also pluralistic. People coexist with disagreement more than it appears online. Offline, most people are navigating contradictions, values versus policies, ideals versus realities. Recognizing that complexity reduced my fear. Fear thrives on simplification. Understanding introduces depth. Mental health research supports this. Psychological flexibility, the ability to hold multiple perspectives without immediate judgment, is linked to resilience. Being immersed in politically diverse environments, while uncomfortable, can strengthen that flexibility if approached with curiosity rather than defense. I started asking questions instead of making statements. Listening instead of preparing responses. The conversations became less threatening, more informative. Policies also taught me independence in practical ways. Systems didn't adapt to my confusion. Deadlines were fixed. Consequences were real. That pressure accelerated learning. Behavioral psychology shows that environments with clear contingencies, actions leading to predictable outcomes, build competence faster. America's systems are unforgiving, but they're consistent. Once I understood the rules, I stopped taking friction personally. It wasn't rejection. It was structure. There were moments of emotional overload. News cycles felt relentless. Social media amplified extremes. I learned to regulate intake intentionally. Limiting exposure wasn't avoidance, it was nervous system care. Research on media consumption confirms that constant political news increases anxiety without improving understanding. Stepping back restored clarity. You don't have to absorb everything to stay informed. Living far from family meant forming values internally rather than inheriting them unquestioned. That process was uncomfortable but empowering. Independence isn't just financial or logistical. It's cognitive. You decide what matters, what doesn't, what deserves energy. Politics stopped being an emotional minefield and became context, a background force shaping systems, not my identity. The biggest lesson was this: understanding doesn't require agreement. You can respect differences without dissolving yourself. That realization healed a quiet fear that adapting meant losing integrity. It didn't. It meant gaining discernment. Politics in daily American life tested my emotional boundaries, communication skills, and self-trust. It pushed me to grow up faster, think deeper, and react slower. Distance from family removed ideological shelter, but it also removed automatic bias. What replaced it was something steadier, informed independence. Living in the U.S. taught me that politics is less about opinions and more about systems, and systems demand clarity, patience, and resilience. Once I stopped fighting that reality, I found balance. Not certainty. Balance. And balance, in a divided world, is a quiet form of strength. Independence was not a choice. Independence didn't arrive like a motivational slogan. It arrived like an empty room. No backup plan. No familiar voice on the other side of the wall. Just responsibility sitting quietly, waiting for me to notice it. In America, independence isn't celebrated after it's earned, it's assumed from the start. And when you're living far from family, that assumption becomes a daily test you never signed up for. At first, I resisted it. I told myself this was temporary, that once things settled, support would appear. It didn't. Bills had deadlines. Appointments required decisions. Mistakes had consequences. Behavioral economics explains this pressure well. Environments with high personal accountability force faster decision-making because delays cost more. Back home, hesitation was buffered by family. Here, hesitation charged interest. The hardest part wasn't doing things alone. It was realizing no one was checking whether I could. In the U.S., systems don't ask about your emotional readiness. They ask for documentation, payment, compliance. That neutrality can feel cruel when you're new. Yet it's also what builds competence. Psychologists studying autonomy note that when external support decreases, internal regulation must increase, or stress overwhelms the system. I felt that shift physically. My shoulders tightened. My thoughts sharpened. I became alert in ways I hadn't been before. Independence showed up in unglamorous moments. Calling customer service and advocating for myself. Reading contracts carefully because no one would translate the fine print. Choosing healthcare plans without advice. Each task seemed small. Together, they rewired my confidence. Neuroscience research on learning confirms that repeated problem-solving strengthens neural pathways associated with self-trust. Confidence didn't come from success alone, it came from survival. Distance from family amplified the stakes. When something went wrong, there was no quick rescue. That reality triggered anxiety at first. Anxiety, however, isn't always the enemy. Clinical psychology distinguishes between maladaptive anxiety and adaptive vigilance. The latter increases preparation. I started double-checking details, planning ahead, anticipating outcomes. What once felt like overthinking became competence. There were moments of resentment. Watching others lean on family support, rides, advice, financial cushions sparked unfair comparisons. Social comparison theory explains why this hurts. When resources differ, effort feels invisible. I was working harder just to reach baseline stability. That realization stung. But it also clarified something essential. Independence is expensive before it's empowering. you pay up front with effort, confusion, and emotional fatigue. Work culture reinforced this lesson. Initiative wasn't optional. Waiting for instructions signaled passivity. Organizational studies show that American workplaces reward proactive behavior, often regardless of intent. I learned to speak up, not because I was confident, but because silence had costs. Each time I asserted myself, my nervous system protested, then adapted. Adaptation is the unsung hero of independence. Loneliness sharpened accountability. Without family routines, time management became personal ethics. If I wasted a weekend, no one corrected me. If I burned out, no one noticed immediately. That freedom was unsettling. Freedom without guidance exposes character. It forces you to decide what matters when no one is watching. Philosophers call this existential autonomy. Psychologists call it adulthood. Healing began when I stopped framing independence as abandonment and started seeing it as initiation. Many cultures mark transitions into responsibility with rituals. Moving to America created an unintentional one. The absence of support wasn't punishment. It was an invitation to grow muscles I hadn't needed before. Research on post-traumatic growth suggests that stress, when processed, can lead to increased personal strength. The key word is processed. Avoidance delays growth. Engagement transforms it. Practical strategies helped. I built routines that mimicked support, calendars, reminders, checklists. These tools externalized memory and reduced cognitive load. Cognitive science shows that structure frees mental energy for decision-making. Independence doesn't mean doing everything mentally. It means designing systems that support you. Emotionally, I practiced self-reassurance. Instead of calling family for immediate validation, I paused. Named the feeling. Decided the next step. This wasn't isolation, it was skill building. Attachment research indicates that secure attachment can be internalized over time through consistent self-soothing. I was becoming my own safety net. Independence also changed how I viewed failure. Mistakes became information, not verdicts. Without an audience, embarrassment lost power. Learning accelerated. This aligns with growth mindset research. Environments that normalize error increase persistence. America's unforgiving systems taught me forgiveness toward myself. Ironically, being treated impersonally helped me develop personal compassion. By the time independence felt natural, I realized something unsettling and freeing. I didn't need permission anymore. Not from family, culture, or fear. Distance had forced me to author my own decisions. That authorship is heavy, but it's also grounding. You stand differently when you know your life moves because you move it. Independence was not a choice. It was a requirement imposed by distance, culture, and circumstance. But what began as pressure became capacity. Living far from family didn't make me cold or detached. It made me capable. And capability, once earned, doesn't disappear. It travels with you, quietly, wherever you go. Love across differences. Love didn't arrive as comfort. It arrived as contrast. Different accents at the dinner table. Different reactions to the same problem. Different assumptions about what love is supposed to look like in daily life. In America, where independence is prized and personal boundaries are carefully guarded. Falling in love across cultural and regional differences felt less like romance and more like negotiation. Not hostile negotiation, constant, quiet recalibration. At first, differences felt exciting. Novelty releases dopamine, and dopamine feels like destiny. Psychology calls this the attraction of dissimilarity. Your brain perks up when something breaks pattern. I was drawn to perspectives that weren't mine, habits that challenged my defaults. Conversations stretched longer because nothing could be assumed. That effort felt meaningful. It felt like growth. Then reality settled in. Love doesn't live on curiosity alone. It lives in routines, expectations, conflict styles, and emotional timing. Cultural psychology explains that people carry relationship scripts, unspoken rules learned from family, media, and environment. Mine emphasized emotional closeness, shared time, collective decision-making. In the U.S., the script leaned toward autonomy, explicit consent, and emotional efficiency. Neither was wrong. They were just mismatched. Conflict revealed the gap fastest. When something felt off, my instinct was to talk it through immediately, soften the edges, restore harmony. The response I met was often space, time to think, regulate, return later. That space felt like withdrawal. In truth, it was self-regulation. Attachment theory clarifies this tension well. Anxious patterns seek closeness under stress. Avoidant patterns seek distance. Cross-cultural couples experience this not as pathology, but as translation difficulty. Without that understanding, love feels fragile. Distance from family intensified everything. There were no elders to mediate, no familiar models to imitate. In many cultures, family absorbs relational strain. In America, couples absorb it alone. That isolation increases pressure. Relationship research shows that couples without external support systems experience higher stress during conflict, even when commitment is strong. We were learning to build a bridge without scaffolding. Language played its own tricks. Words like space, freedom, and commitment carried different emotional weights. Semantic differences caused emotional misunderstandings. Linguists note that shared language doesn't guarantee shared meaning. I learned that love requires meta-communication, talking about how you talk. It's awkward, unromantic, and essential. There were moments I questioned compatibility. Compatibility is often marketed as sameness. In reality, it's tolerance plus skill. Skill in listening without defending. Skill in asking without accusing. Skill in naming needs without moralizing them. Couples therapy research consistently shows that success depends less on shared values and more on repairability, the capacity to recover after. Misunderstanding. We practiced repair badly at first. Then less badly. Then well enough. Cultural differences also shaped expectations around time and ambition. In the U.S., personal goals often take precedence, even within relationships. I had been taught that love meant prioritizing togetherness. Negotiating calendars felt like negotiating worth. Over time, I understood that independence wasn't indifference. It was identity maintenance. Self-determination theory supports this. Autonomy is a basic psychological need. When respected, it strengthens bonds rather than weakening them. Healing happened through specificity. Vague frustration became clear requests. I need reassurance tonight, worked better than silence. I need time to think, worked better than disappearance. These micro-clarities reduced threat responses. Neuroscience shows that predictability calms the amygdala. Love became safer when behavior matched explanation. Climate and lifestyle differences added texture. Cold seasons meant more indoor time, fewer social buffers, more exposure to each other's habits. You learn someone quickly when weather removes distraction. What once felt charming can feel irritating. This isn't failure, it's proximity. The Gottman Institute's research highlights that irritation is inevitable, contempt is optional. Choosing curiosity over contempt kept us grounded. There was grief too. Grief for the love I imagined, effortless, aligned, validated by family presence. Accepting grief made room for the love I had earned, conscious, resilient. Grief processing research suggests that naming loss prevents it from leaking into resentment. I learned to mourn fantasies without punishing reality. Distance from family forced us to define us without inheritance. Traditions were invented, not assumed. Holidays were redesigned. Celebrations became intentional. That intentionality deepened meaning. Sociologists call this chosen culture, the practices couples create when default scripts don't fit. Chosen culture is fragile at first. Then it becomes strong because it's deliberate. Love across differences taught me emotional bilingualism. I could honor my needs without dismissing another's. I could ask for closeness without interpreting space as rejection. I could stand in disagreement without panicking about abandonment. These are not romantic skills. They are survival skills that make romance sustainable. Independence didn't disappear in love. It matured. Love didn't rescue me from loneliness, it invited me to meet it honestly. In America, where relationships often balance autonomy and connection, I learned that love isn't measured by sameness or sacrifice. It's measured by understanding. Living far from family meant love had to carry more weight, and so it demanded more clarity. What survived wasn't perfect alignment. It was mutual learning. And that learning built something quieter than passion, sturdier than comfort, trust. Trust that differences wouldn't erase connection. Trust that understanding, practiced daily, really does heal. Marriage tested by distance. Marriage doesn't break loudly when distance is involved. It thins. It stretches. It asks questions every day without raising its voice. Living in the U.S. Far from family, turned marriage from a shared identity into a shared responsibility. There was no crowd to witness it, no relatives to cushion misunderstandings, no inherited scripts to fall back on. Just two people, carrying different histories, trying to build stability in a system that assumes you already have it. Distance removed witnesses. That was the first test. When no one sees your effort, effort changes meaning. Back home, marriage existed inside a network, parents, siblings, traditions, expectations. In America, marriage often exists as a private contract. Privacy sounds romantic until conflict arrives. Without external validation, disagreements felt heavier. Was I overreacting, or was something actually wrong? Family used to answer that question. Now, we had to. Stress magnified small things. Financial planning, healthcare decisions, work schedules, each choice carried weight because mistakes were expensive. Research in marital psychology shows that external stressors, not personal flaws, are the strongest predictors of relationship strain. Immigration stress, job uncertainty, and cultural adaptation created a background noise that never fully turned off. We weren't fighting each other. We were fighting pressure while facing each other. Communication changed under that pressure. Tone mattered more. Timing mattered more. Silence felt louder. In moments of exhaustion, we defaulted to our native conflict styles. One of us leaned toward discussion, the other toward withdrawal. Attachment theory explains how stress activates early patterns. Distance from family removed the buffer that usually slows these reactions. The result wasn't drama, it was misalignment. And misalignment, repeated, breeds doubt. Marriage also became logistical in ways that felt unromantic. Who handles which system? Who tracks deadlines? Who absorbs uncertainty? In the U.S., administrative life is dense. Couples often divide emotional labor without realizing it. Sociological studies show that unequal cognitive load, planning, remembering, anticipating, correlates with resentment. We had to make the invisible visible. Not to assign blame, but to redistribute weight. Loneliness inside marriage surprised me. Being partnered didn't cancel isolation, it changed its shape. When both people are adapting, neither has excess capacity. You can love deeply and still feel alone. Naming that reality was uncomfortable but necessary. Clinical research on relational honesty indicates that suppressed loneliness often transforms into irritability. Once acknowledged, it loses its poison. Distance from family forced marriage to become its own ecosystem. Traditions weren't inherited, they were negotiated. Holidays felt hollow at first. Over time, we built new rituals, small, repeatable moments that signaled belonging. Relationship science emphasizes the power of rituals in creating emotional safety. A shared walk. A weekly check-in. Predictability became intimacy. There were moments when the question surfaced quietly, is this supposed to be this hard? Cultural narratives often promise ease if love is right. Reality disagreed. Longitudinal studies of marriage show that satisfaction fluctuates, especially during major life transitions. Difficulty didn't mean incompatibility. It meant transformation. Marriage wasn't failing, it was shedding illusions. Understanding replaced accusation. We learned to frame conflict as information. What is this stress revealing? What need is unmet? This cognitive reframe reduced defensiveness. Neuroscience supports this approach. When the brain perceives collaboration instead of threat, problem-solving regions activate. We stopped trying to win arguments and started trying to understand patterns. Distance sharpened accountability. Without family to intervene, repair had to happen directly. Apologies became clearer. Boundaries became explicit. Repair attempts, according to Gottman's research, predict marital resilience more than compatibility. We practiced repair imperfectly but consistently. Consistency mattered more than eloquence. Marriage tested by distance also clarified commitment. Commitment wasn't staying because it was easy. It was staying because growth was happening. Commitment shifted from emotion to intention. That shift stabilized us. Intention outlasts mood. Intention survives stress. Healing arrived slowly. Not through grand gestures, but through reliability. Showing up tired. Following through. Listening without fixing. These behaviors rebuild trust neurologically. Trust isn't abstract, it's a pattern the brain learns. Each kept promise reduced vigilance. Each honest conversation restored safety. America's culture of independence challenged traditional marriage expectations. Autonomy didn't threaten intimacy, it redefined it. We learned that partnership doesn't mean merging identities. It means coordinating them. Self-determination theory supports this balance. relationships thrive when autonomy and connection coexist. Distance from family made that balance unavoidable. Marriage didn't become perfect. It became sturdy. Sturdiness is underrated. It doesn't sparkle on social media, but it holds weight. Living far from family stripped marriage down to its essentials: communication, trust, repair, and shared meaning. Everything else was optional. Distance tested us by removing cushions. What remained was choice. Daily choice. To stay curious. To assume goodwill. To grow instead of withdraw. That choice, repeated, became strength. Marriage in America, far from family, didn't break us. It clarified us. It taught us that love isn't proven by absence of strain, but by the willingness to carry it together. And that lesson, once learned, doesn't fade with distance. Family means something new. Family used to be automatic. It existed without explanation, without effort, without scheduling. It was background noise you only noticed when it disappeared. Living in the U.S. Far from everyone who shared my blood, language shortcuts, and childhood memories, forced a quiet redefinition. Family stopped being a place I came from and became something I had to consciously build. At first, the absence felt like subtraction. No spontaneous advice. No shared meals that healed bad days without conversation. In America, where mobility is normal and relatives often live states apart, this absence didn't register as unusual to others. To me, it felt destabilizing. Family had always been the emotional infrastructure beneath everything else. Without it, even small stressors felt heavier. Psychology explains why this hits so hard. Family provides what researchers call baseline regulation, a constant emotional reference point that stabilizes identity. Remove that baseline, and the nervous system searches for new anchors. That search can feel like loss before it feels like growth. I mistook that discomfort for failure, not realizing it was adaptation in progress. Holidays were the first real confrontation. In the U.S., holidays are culturally significant but often privately celebrated. Without extended family nearby, the rituals felt hollow. Traditions without people feel like empty gestures. I grieved that loss more than expected. Grief theory suggests that ambiguous loss, absence without closure, is especially difficult to process. No one had died. Nothing was wrong. Yet something essential was missing. Over time, I noticed a shift. Invitations started to come from unexpected places. Coworkers. Neighbors. Friends who also lived far from their families. These gatherings didn't replicate what I lost, but they created something parallel. Sociologists call this chosen family, relationships formed by circumstance, shared values, and mutual care rather than blood. At first, I resisted the label. It felt like a consolation prize. It wasn't. Chosen family operates differently. It requires intention. You show up because you decide to, not because tradition demands it. That choice adds weight. Research on social bonding shows that voluntary commitment strengthens attachment more than obligation. I learned to appreciate that someone wanted me there, not because they had to, but because they chose me. This redefinition also changed my expectations. Family was no longer the place where I offloaded all emotional needs. That responsibility distributed itself. Some friends offered advice. Others offered laughter. Some relationships held space for vulnerability, others for distraction. Psychological resilience improves when support is diversified. Depending on one source for everything is fragile. Distance forced diversification. Marriage evolved within this new definition. Without extended family support, partnership absorbed roles it never had before. Not as replacement, but as collaboration. We became each other's primary witnesses. That closeness was intense. It required boundaries to prevent emotional overload. Family didn't disappear, it condensed. Learning to manage that intensity was part of redefining what family meant. Technology softened distance but didn't erase it. Video calls helped, yet they highlighted difference. Life moved on separately. Conversations became updates rather than shared experiences. This shift demanded acceptance. Attachment research indicates that secure bonds can survive reduced contact if emotional meaning remains intact. Family wasn't gone. It was transformed. Culturally, America reinforced this transformation. Independence is celebrated. Reliance is optional. That ethos initially felt cold. Over time, it encouraged emotional adulthood. I stopped expecting family to solve my confusion. I brought them reflections instead of problems. This wasn't withdrawal. It was maturation. Developmental psychology describes this as differentiation, the ability to remain connected while self-defining. Distance accelerated that process. Family also became less about sameness and more about understanding. Differences in worldview became clearer with time apart. Political opinions. Lifestyle choices. Values shaped by different environments. Distance removed daily friction but introduced philosophical contrast. Accepting those differences without needing agreement strengthened respect. Respect, I learned, is a quieter form of love. Healing happened when I stopped comparing. My family didn't look like the families around me, and it didn't need to. America's diversity normalized non-traditional structures. Single-parent households. Blended families. Friends as family networks. Exposure reduced shame. Normalization heals by widening the definition of acceptable belonging. I began to recognize family in behaviors rather than labels. Who checks in consistently? Who shows up during stress? Who listens without fixing? These patterns mattered more than titles. Social psychology confirms that perceived support predicts well-being more strongly than actual family proximity. Support is functional, not geographic. Distance also revealed what I carried internally. Values. Humor. Emotional responses shaped by family long before I left. They traveled with me. Family wasn't only external, it was internalized. That realization brought peace. Separation didn't erase influence. It clarified it. Redefining family didn't mean detaching from origins. It meant expanding meaning. Family became layered, the people who raised me, the people who chose me, and the person I was becoming. Each layer served a purpose. None replaced the others. Living far from family taught me that belonging isn't inherited once and kept forever. It's practiced. Renewed. Sometimes rebuilt. And that process, while painful, is empowering. You learn that connection is not limited to blood or proximity. It's created through presence, effort, and care. Family means something new now. Not less. Not weaker. Broader. More intentional. Distance didn't erase it. Distance taught me how to recognize it in places I never thought to look. And once you learn that skill, you're never truly without family again. Mental breakdown moment. The breakdown didn't look dramatic. No collapsing on the floor. No crying in public. It looked like forgetting simple things, rereading the same email 5 times, feeling irritated by harmless questions. It looked like waking up tired after a full night's sleep and going to bed exhausted from doing almost nothing. In America, where productivity is a virtue and silence often passes as strength, a mental breakdown can hide in plain sight. Pressure accumulated quietly. Distance from family removed emotional shock absorbers. Marriage carried weight. Cultural translation demanded constant attention. Independence required relentless decision-making. Cognitive psychology calls this decision fatigue, the gradual depletion of mental energy after repeated choices. When every day requires navigating systems, expectations, and self-regulation, the brain eventually protests. Mine did, not with panic, but with numbness. Numbness is misleading. It feels calm, but it's actually overload. Neuroscience explains that when stress exceeds coping capacity, the nervous system shifts into shutdown mode. Emotions flatten. Motivation disappears. You're not relaxed, you're conserving. I mistook that conservation for failure. I thought I was losing drive, when in fact my system was protecting itself. The moment it became undeniable was ordinary. A small inconvenience, a delayed appointment, a missed form, triggered disproportionate frustration. My reaction surprised me. Emotional responses that exceed context are signals. Clinical psychology treats them as data, not defects. Something deeper was asking for attention. I had been performing resilience without practicing recovery. America rewards endurance. Rest is framed as earned, not necessary. That narrative seeped into my thinking. I kept going because stopping felt irresponsible. But burnout research is clear. Sustained stress without recovery degrades cognitive performance, emotional regulation, and physical health. The breakdown wasn't weakness. It was predictability. Distance from family amplified isolation during this phase. I didn't want to worry them. Time zones made conversations brief. I edited my feelings to fit small windows of connection. Emotional editing is exhausting. Studies show that emotional suppression increases physiological stress even when outward behavior remains composed. I was calm on the outside and depleted inside. Work didn't pause. Systems don't adjust for invisible strain. Deadlines arrived. Expectations remained. That neutrality felt harsh, but it also revealed a truth. Waiting for external permission to rest doesn't work. Recovery has to be chosen. Chosen without applause. Chosen despite guilt. The turning point wasn't a revelation. It was acknowledgement. I named what was happening. Naming reduces threat. When the brain can label an experience, it shifts from alarm to analysis. I stopped calling it laziness or failure and started calling it overload. That single reframing reduced shame, and reduced shame creates space for action. Action was small. Smaller than pride would prefer. Short walks. Earlier nights. Fewer commitments. Limits on news consumption. Research on nervous system regulation emphasizes micro-interventions, brief, consistent practices that signal safety. I didn't fix my life. I stabilized my baseline. I also learned to ask differently. Instead of asking for solutions, I asked for presence. Instead of explaining everything, I shared one honest sentence. This shift mattered. Social support is most effective when it matches the need. During overload, validation helps more than advice. Understanding that changed how I reached out. Therapeutic concepts that once felt abstract became practical. Window of tolerance, the range in which emotions are manageable, became a daily check. When I noticed myself outside that window, I reduced demands. Not forever. Temporarily. Flexibility prevented collapse. Rigid perseverance invites it. Marriage felt the impact too. Breakdown isolates even within partnership. I learned to narrate my internal state without blaming. My capacity is low today, replaced defensiveness. This language reduced misinterpretation. Relationship research confirms that sharing internal states increases empathy and decreases conflict escalation. Clarity is calming. Distance from family meant grieving privately. There was sadness for missed milestones, for not being physically present, for carrying adulthood alone. Grief layered onto stress. Unprocessed grief drains energy. Allowing myself to feel it, without rushing to positivity, released pressure. Acceptance-based therapies emphasize this principle: what you allow, you metabolize. Sleep improved before mood did. That order matters. Physiology leads psychology more often than the reverse. Regular sleep, light exposure, and movement recalibrated my system. The mind followed. Healing didn't feel inspirational. It felt boring. Predictable. Effective. The breakdown taught me to respect limits without dramatizing them. Limits are information. They indicate capacity, not character. America's culture often confuses the two. I stopped doing that to myself. Independence doesn't mean infinite endurance. It means intelligent self-management. Gradually, color returned. Concentration improved. Humor resurfaced. Not because stress vanished, but because resilience widened. Resilience isn't toughness, it's elasticity. The ability to bend and recover. Neuroscience supports this. Repeated cycles of stress and recovery strengthen regulatory circuits. Breakdown, processed properly, becomes training. Looking back, the breakdown was a checkpoint, not an ending. It forced integration. All the differences, climate, culture, politics, marriage, distance, had piled up. The system needed recalibration. Once recalibrated, life resumed with better settings. Understanding healed what denial prolonged. Living far from family didn't cause the breakdown. Avoiding my limits did. The moment I listened, the system responded. That response wasn't dramatic. It was steady. And steady is what lasts. Understanding heals slowly. Healing didn't arrive with relief. It arrived with clarity, and clarity is quieter than hope. After the breakdown, nothing magically improved overnight. Life in America stayed demanding. Distance from family remained real. Marriage still required effort. But something fundamental shifted. I stopped fighting my experience and started understanding it. And understanding, while slow, is one of the most powerful forms of healing. Understanding begins with naming patterns instead of judging outcomes. I noticed how stress accumulated predictably during long work weeks, seasonal changes, unresolved conversations, excessive news intake. This wasn't random weakness. It was cause and effect. Psychology calls this insight-oriented coping, recognizing triggers and responses rather than suppressing symptoms. When you see the pattern, the chaos loses authority. I also learned that healing doesn't mean returning to who you were before. It means integrating what happened. Trauma research emphasizes this distinction. Recovery isn't erasure, it's reorganization. My nervous system wasn't broken, it had adapted to prolonged demand. Healing meant teaching it that constant vigilance was no longer required. Living in the U.S. accelerated this lesson. Systems didn't slow down because I was healing. That forced realism. Healing had to coexist with responsibility. This constraint shaped a practical approach. Instead of waiting to feel better, I adjusted how I operated while not feeling better. That adjustment mattered more than mood. Understanding also dismantled self-blame. I stopped asking why I couldn't handle it like everyone else. Comparison lost relevance once I realized everyone carries invisible context. Cultural psychologists note that individualist societies hide support structures behind performance. You see outcomes, not scaffolding. Understanding that reduced shame. Shame thrives on isolation, understanding reconnects cause to context. Distance from family became less painful when I reframed it. Separation wasn't abandonment, it was differentiation. Developmental theory describes healthy adulthood as the ability to stay emotionally connected while functioning independently. Distance forced that capacity to mature faster. What felt like loss was also growth. Holding both truths at once required emotional complexity. Complexity is healing's language. Understanding slowed my reactions. When conflict arose in marriage, I paused before interpreting. Was this stress speaking? Fatigue? Fear? This pause changed outcomes. Neuroscience shows that naming internal states activates regulatory brain regions, reducing impulsive responses. Slower reactions prevented escalation. Prevention felt better than repair. I also understood limits differently. Limits weren't barriers, they were guides. Knowing when to stop, rest, or say no preserved energy. Conservation is not quitting. It's strategy. Elite performance research confirms that recovery is integral to sustained output. Healing honored biology instead of defying it. Understanding reshaped my relationship with emotion. Emotions stopped being commands and became signals. Loneliness signaled unmet connection. Irritability signaled overload. Sadness signaled grief. Once decoded, these states lost urgency. Emotional literacy reduced panic. Panic thrives on confusion. America's culture often prioritizes action over reflection. Healing required balancing both. Reflection without action stagnates. Action without reflection exhausts. Understanding aligned them. Small behavioral changes, consistent routines, clearer communication, protected downtime, created cumulative stability. Stability restored trust in myself. Understanding also softened expectations of others. People weren't obstacles, they were operating within their own pressures. This perspective reduced resentment. Compassion expanded without self-sacrifice. Boundaries became clearer when blame disappeared. Social psychology supports this. Attributional generosity reduces interpersonal stress and improves well-being. Family relationships benefited too. Conversations became less reactive, more intentional. I stopped seeking reassurance and started sharing perspective. That shift altered dynamics. Family didn't need to rescue me, they could relate to me. This equality strengthened connection. Healing unfolded unevenly. Some days felt light. Others felt heavy. Understanding normalized fluctuation. Emotional recovery isn't linear. Expecting linearity creates disappointment. Accepting waves builds resilience. Resilience is endurance with flexibility. Over time, understanding restored agency. Agency isn't control over outcomes, it's choice in response. Living far from family removed automatic guidance. Understanding replaced it with informed autonomy. Decisions felt grounded, not reactive. The most surprising lesson was patience. Healing couldn't be rushed without resistance. The nervous system heals on its own timeline. Pushing delayed progress. Allowing accelerated it. Acceptance-based psychology confirms this paradox. Acceptance reduces suffering faster than force. Understanding healed because it replaced fear with orientation. I knew where I was and why. Disorientation is distressing. Orientation is calming. Even difficult realities become manageable once understood. Distance, culture, politics, marriage, breakdown, all became context, not identity. Identity stabilized. I wasn't failing. I was adapting. That reframing didn't eliminate challenge, but it removed despair. Healing didn't announce completion. It integrated quietly. I noticed it when stress no longer felt personal. When rest felt earned, not guilty. When decisions felt deliberate. When distance felt informative rather than cruel. Understanding heals slowly because it rebuilds from the inside. It teaches the system that reality is survivable. And once that lesson is learned, it doesn't fade. It becomes foundation. Building a life that holds you. Stability didn't arrive as a reward. It arrived as a structure. After understanding settled in, the next phase was construction, building a life that could actually hold me when pressure returned. Insight without structure collapses under weight. This section is about what came after awareness, design, not motivation. I stopped relying on willpower. Willpower fades. Systems endure. That shift changed everything. Mornings gained shape. Evenings gained closure. Sleep stopped being optional. These weren't dramatic lifestyle overhauls, they were repeatable anchors. Behavioral science confirms that consistency outperforms intensity. A stable rhythm regulates the nervous system more reliably than occasional bursts of effort. Work demanded boundaries. Not emotional boundaries, logistical ones. Clear start times. Clear end times. Fewer open loops. Productivity improved because cognitive load decreased. Attention recovered. The American work culture rewards availability, but sustainability requires limits. Designing boundaries protected output and health simultaneously. I built redundancy into support. One person cannot carry everything. Expecting them to leads to disappointment. I diversified connection, friends for perspective, family for grounding, colleagues for collaboration. Social resilience depends on distributed support. This design reduced pressure on any single relationship and stabilized all of them. Physical environment mattered more than expected. Light, sound, order, and movement influenced mood daily. I simplified spaces. Reduced noise. Increased exposure to daylight. Environmental psychology shows that small spatial changes compound into emotional regulation. My home became restorative instead of draining. Marriage benefited from structure too. Instead of waiting for connection, we scheduled it. That felt unromantic at first, then liberating. Predictability created safety. Safety created openness. Conflict decreased because needs were addressed before they escalated. Structure didn't limit intimacy, it enabled it. Distance from family required intentional maintenance. Regular calls replaced sporadic check-ins. Not to update, but to connect. Shared rituals survived geography. Consistency mattered more than duration. 10 minutes weekly outperformed 1 hour monthly. Relationships thrive on reliability. I stopped consuming information indiscriminately. News intake became deliberate. Endless updates overstimulate threat responses. Cognitive science links excessive exposure to anxiety loops. Limiting input restored clarity. Being informed didn't require being flooded. Movement became functional, not aesthetic. Walking daily regulated mood. Strength training stabilized energy. Exercise wasn't a solution, it was infrastructure. The body influences the mind continuously. Ignoring that connection delays healing. Nutrition simplified. Regular meals. Fewer extremes. Blood sugar stability improved emotional stability. This wasn't discipline, it was maintenance. Maintenance is invisible until neglected. I also designed recovery. Recovery isn't inactivity, it's strategic rest. Scheduled downtime prevented collapse. Guilt-free rest restored performance. This reframed rest from indulgence to requirement. Elite performers plan recovery. Ordinary people should too. Spirituality shifted from belief to practice. Silence. Reflection. Meaning-making. Not answers, orientation. Existential psychology emphasizes meaning as a buffer against stress. I didn't need certainty, I needed coherence. Practices provided that. Financial structure reduced background anxiety. Budgets aren't restrictions, they're visibility tools. Visibility reduced fear. Planning restored agency. Money stopped being a constant question mark. I learned to anticipate stress instead of reacting to it. Travel weeks. Deadlines. Holidays. These were predictable. Preparing in advance prevented overload. Anticipation is a form of care. The most important structure was self-trust. I honored signals instead of overriding them. Fatigue meant pause. Discomfort meant inquiry. Trust rebuilt slowly, then steadily. Once restored, decisions became easier. Doubt decreased. America remained intense. That didn't change. What changed was capacity. Structure expanded capacity. Pressure felt manageable because it met resistance, not fragility. Setbacks still happened. Structure didn't eliminate them. It softened impact and shortened recovery. That's resilience, not immunity, but elasticity. This life wasn't perfect. It was sustainable. Sustainability is underrated. It doesn't impress, it endures. Endurance creates freedom. Over time, the system became invisible. That's success. When structure disappears into habit, energy returns for creativity, connection, and growth. Healing matured into living. Building a life that holds you means designing for bad days, not good ones. Good days take care of themselves. Bad days reveal architecture. The lesson was simple but demanding. Clarity creates design. Design creates stability. Stability creates freedom. Not instantly. Gradually. Reliably. And once the structure exists, life stops feeling like something to survive and starts feeling like something you can actually live. A gentle, hopeful ending. The ending did not arrive with fireworks or sudden certainty. It arrived quietly, shaped by acceptance rather than victory. After everything, distance, pressure, rebuilding, what remained was not a dramatic transformation but a steady sense of alignment. Life stopped asking to be conquered and started asking to be understood. Hope, I learned, is not optimism. It is orientation. Optimism waits for things to improve. Hope moves forward even when conditions stay imperfect. That difference mattered. America remained complex. Marriage remained work. Family distance remained real. Yet none of those facts felt threatening anymore. They were simply part of the landscape. Acceptance did not mean giving up standards. It meant releasing unrealistic expectations. I stopped expecting ease. I stopped expecting clarity to come first. Instead, I trusted process. Progress followed naturally. The relationship with my past softened. Memories stopped pulling me backward. They became reference points, not anchors. Psychological research shows that narrative integration reduces emotional reactivity. When experiences are integrated into a coherent story, they lose their power to destabilize. That integration marked the real ending. Gratitude emerged without effort. Not forced gratitude, not performative positivity, quiet appreciation. The ability to notice stability. The privilege of safety. The strength built under pressure. Gratitude did not erase pain, it contextualized it. Marriage settled into realism. Not romance-free, but grounded. We stopped trying to prove compatibility and started practicing it. Differences stopped feeling like threats. They became sources of learning. Long-term partnership is less about similarity and more about regulation, how two nervous systems learn to coexist. Family relationships matured across distance. Love no longer required proximity. Respect replaced guilt. Communication became intentional rather than reactive. Distance stopped feeling like absence and started feeling like space. Identity stabilized. I was no longer torn between versions of myself. Immigrant, partner, individual, these identities coexisted without competition. Identity integration reduces internal conflict. The mind relaxes when it no longer needs to choose. Purpose clarified quietly. Not a single mission, but a direction, to live with coherence. Decisions became easier when filtered through that lens. Coherence reduces cognitive load. Fewer contradictions mean fewer drains on energy. The future stopped feeling urgent. Planning remained important, but panic dissolved. Time felt expansive again. Anxiety compresses time. Calm restores it. With calm, patience returned. This ending was gentle because it did not demand more growth. Growth happened anyway, but without pressure. Rest and growth stopped being opposites. They became partners. I learned that healing does not mean becoming unbreakable. It means becoming reparable. Resilience lives in recovery, not resistance. Setbacks lost their drama because recovery was familiar. The story did not close, it stabilized. Stability is an ending worth honoring. Many stories chase climax. Few honor equilibrium. Yet equilibrium is where life is actually lived. For listeners and viewers, this section is not meant to inspire comparison. It is meant to normalize slow endings. Not all journeys conclude with transformation. Some conclude with peace. Peace is not boring. It is earned. This narrative belongs to many immigrants, many couples, many individuals navigating pressure quietly. The details differ, but the arc is familiar. Disorientation. Adaptation. Integration. Calm. The hope offered here is practical. It does not promise ease. It promises orientation. It suggests that clarity follows action, not the other way around. It reminds that systems matter more than motivation. It reassures that distance does not erase connection. For English learners, this ending carries another purpose. Language learning mirrors life transitions. Progress feels invisible. Confusion comes before fluency. Patience outperforms intensity. Listening repeatedly builds understanding. Speaking slowly builds confidence. Growth arrives quietly. The words slow down here on purpose. Not to end, but to settle. Listening is not always about gaining information. Sometimes it is about letting the mind rest in rhythm. Calm comprehension builds trust in one's ability to understand. This story does not ask for applause. It asks for presence. For breathing space. For recognition that survival can evolve into living without a dramatic turning point. The final lesson is simple and durable. Acceptance is not resignation. It is alignment with reality. From alignment, choice becomes clear. From choice, peace emerges. The ending holds no cliffhanger. It holds continuity. Tomorrow will come with its demands. That is fine. The structure exists. The orientation remains. And if this story accompanies someone late at night, during a commute, or in a quiet moment of practice, let it serve as reassurance. Progress does not need to announce itself. Healing does not need an audience. Stability is enough. This is not the end of the journey. It is the moment the journey stops feeling like a burden. And that, quietly, is a hopeful ending. Some journeys don't end with applause. They end with quiet strength. Living far from family didn't make life easier. It made it clearer. Clearer about who I am when no one is watching. Clearer about love when comfort is gone. Clearer about the kind of life that can still grow, even in unfamiliar soil. Distance didn't break me. It trained me. It taught me independence, emotional resilience, and something even deeper, understanding. And understanding, more than motivation, is what actually heals. If this story felt familiar. If you're living far from home, carrying silent pressure, questioning your choices. Or rebuilding yourself in a place that doesn't always feel like yours. Then this channel is for you. Here, we don't rush healing. We don't fake positivity. We learn slowly, reflect honestly, and grow step by step, through real stories, real emotions, and real life in the United States. More stories are coming. Stories about distance, marriage, identity, culture shock, emotional survival, and becoming stronger without becoming hard. So if you want content that understands you, not judges you, not pushes you, but walks with you, subscribe to the channel, like this video if it spoke to you, share it with someone who needs quiet strength today, because sometimes the strongest growth happens quietly. And sometimes understanding is the beginning of everything. See you in the next story.